Next up, a quick glance at your Facebook feed these days is likely to result in the discovery of just how many of your family, friends, and colleagues have somehow become medical experts over the pandemic. And somehow, they all know better than those medical experts who actually went to school, some for a decade or more, and know more of the subject. Facebook and other platforms have repeatedly come under fire for their attempts and oftentimes lack thereof to stop the spread of misinformation about COVID, masks, vaccines, and the supposed miracle cures. Of course, it's not just social media. There was that guy, the former president.
I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside?
Oh, and then there's that new GOP Senate candidate in Pennsylvania. You may have heard of him, Dr. Oz, whose fame comes at least in part to those hot takes like this one about the controversial anti-malaria drug to treat the coronavirus.
For folks, especially if they're high risk and have comorbidities, I would consider giving it, and I would take it myself if I was having issues with the virus.
I wouldn't, and I didn't. And while that kind of advice is obviously a problem for the people who listen to it, it's increasingly becoming a problem for the rest of us as well, as the refusal to follow scientifically backed advice is helping drive variants around the globe. And I'm joined by Claire Wardle, U.S. Director of First Draft, a nonprofit focused on tackling disinformation. Claire, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, we've always had angry Uncle Bob, as I know you've pointed out in the past. He just hasn't had a broadcast station like Facebook to tell everybody that knows him and doesn't know him what his thoughts are about science. Talk to me, we're going to get a little deeper into the mis and disinformation, but talk to me why you're concerned right now about, as we might be getting into an endemic instead of a pandemic and living with this COVID, why are you concerned about how the variants might be being fueled by the dis and misinformation?
So the reason that I'm worried is that we're 20 months in and pandemic fatigue is real. And so here's more news that's depressing. We've just got through Thanksgiving. We were hoping that the holiday season was going to be okay. And then all of a sudden, their news flashes tell us that, oh, your life is being turned upside down again. And so as humans, we're not very good with uncertainty. And unfortunately, over the last 20 months, we've had public health advice that has shifted as we've learned more, but it's also looked like sometimes that advice has changed and shifted. And so people have kind of lost trust, unfortunately, in the public health system. And so now we're at a point where we need people to listen again, but you kind of got people turning off from the public health institutions and turning to Uncle Bob and turning to that person on Facebook at a point where we desperately need to be following the new public health advice.
I read years ago, and I'm sure you know this better than I do, but there was a study done about how quickly our brains adapt to if we have to change our interaction with an interface, like at the ATM, right? So if you put your ATM card in and the interface has changed, you still hit the old buttons a couple of times, but then eventually you catch up and it becomes the standard way of operating. Are we kind of at that point with the pandemic where we're looking at information? I mean, I was connected with some folks talking about the variant, and they were just like, I'm not even looking at it. I'm not even going to worry about it yet, which I don't know was the worst point of view considering. Where are we with our brains, and what should we be doing with our brains to try and stay more engaged and smarter?
Yeah, so information overload is a real problem. The WHO talks about an infodemic, and that's not just false and misleading information. It's that there's too much information. And because of that, and because we're tired and stressed and scared, it's easier to just kind of like to lock down and to not seek out new information. And you're right, we know this. More and more people are turning away from news because it's hard and it's difficult. And so in this moment, it's about how do we get that messaging right to say, it's not over. We have to take this seriously. But I think you're also right to say, spending hours going down rabbit holes on Google isn't the answer either. Like, stick to your trusted news source, like yourself, and understand that, listen to the people who know, listen to the experts, and recognize in this moment that's more important than ever.
I know that there's a challenge as well for folks who want to get good information and spread good information. And then you get on Google and you want to type in maybe a more specific phrase and you end up with a PDF that's 100 pages long that's actually from the CDC or something. something, and I didn't go to school. I can't read it. Do you have a message for public health communicators about what they could be doing to help us get information in our brain in a way that we can digest it and actually understand it?
Yeah, but the information landscape is not symmetrical. So you're absolutely right. We have public health practitioners who are very good at long, dense reports. But on the other side, we have conspiracy theorists who are really good at creating very engaging content for Instagram, fun TikTok videos. Like, they understand that, again, the way that our brains have been trained over the last 5 years because of these machines is that we like short and snappy, we like visual. And so unfortunately, because we're in this asymmetrical space, the other side is winning. So it's not that public health professionals should dumb down, but there is a need to say, how do we get more designers in there? How do we get people who understand the power of image and visuals and strong infographics? We definitely need much more of that.
So as a user, what should I be aware of in how I feel and how I react when I see something online? I mean, I know to some degree, and I think a lot of folks know, that if what they're reading they agree with 100%, it may not be true. They may be stuck in their echo chamber. But are there any feelings that I should pay attention to that should be sort of a red flag to me to take a beat and learn more before I hit the share button?
Well, you're absolutely right to talk about feelings. So researchers and academics and journalists, we like to think that people have a rational relationship to information, but all of us as humans have an emotional relationship to information. So if something makes you want to hit the angry emoji, it makes you feel scared, it makes you want to buy something, or it makes you feel, I was right all along. Like, you have to recognize those feelings, because when we have those strong feelings, our brains stop working in the way that we need them to work, and we're much more likely to share without thinking. So whilst when we talk about media literacy, yes, people should be better at Googling the headlines and looking at fact-checking sites, but actually we need to be much better at learning emotional skepticism. If something makes you feel strongly, think, a bit like when you eat too many cookies and you don't need that fifth one. We have to learn, like, oh, our brains are not acting in a way that's helpful right now, and take a beat, slow down, and certainly don't share anything unless you're 100% sure. And the truth is, around a pandemic, very few of us can be 100% sure because we're not epidemiologists.
Right. Well, I'm 100% sure, but I'm always wrong. But I get paid to be a know-it-all now, as my brother likes to point out, so it works out okay. So do you think Facebook, and I had a lot of engagement with a high school friend who was an anti-vaxxer on Facebook, and every time he posted something about me saying, hey, go, get a vaccine, he'd get piled on, right? All of my other liberal, progressive friends who were leaning in on science would sometimes call him names, and, it was not productive, right?
Yeah.
What should we be doing with those people in our social media sphere who are wrong? I mean, are just wrong about the vaccine, spreading misinformation? How can we be better community citizens to help them be better understanding, or even just a little bit more open-minded?
It's about listening. It's about having empathy and understanding, why is it that your high school friend doesn't want to get vaccinated? It's not because they're a problematic person. There's fears there. There are a number of people who actually, 25% of Americans have a fear of needles. There are reasons why people don't want to get vaccinated. And sometimes they hide behind misinformation as a reason for not doing it. So actually saying to somebody, hey, I get it. It's scary right now. My life is completely different. I'm struggling to work out who to trust and what's right or wrong. I'd love to talk to you about this. And so the more you can actually engage and you're listening and you're not judgmental, the more somebody might be like, well, actually, I had a bad experience with the vaccine when I was younger, and I just don't, so then you kind of try to figure out what it is that's worrying them. And then it's easier to try and talk to them about those fears rather than, hey, I saw this on PolitiFact, you're wrong, here's the fact-checking article. I mean, that's the worst thing you can possibly do. It's not I'm right, you're wrong. It's using language like we, our community, society. It's about creating connections with people. But sometimes that's not easy to do in the flame wars that are, Facebook comments. But that's really what we should be doing with each other.
Have you seen any a growing awareness of the bot worlds and the disinformation camps? I mean, I've had some success talking to people saying, listen, what you're retweeting is coming from outside the country. It's not a real person. It's not a real organization. And that has made some traction. I know that they're trying to tamper down those farms, those bot farms. But at the same time, I do think that there's been a little bit more growing awareness from users about trying to check at least the validity of where this info is coming from. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right to talk about tactics as opposed to the content. So the more you can get people to think about, well, who's going to benefit from pushing this? So sometimes somebody will send me a site that's pushing really problematic health information. I'm like, well, let's have a look at the person behind this site. Let's look at how many supplements they're selling and how much profit they're making off people like you because they want to scare you and then sell you something. So the more you can kind of break down the tactics of disinformation agents, the more likely people are going to say, oh, okay, I get that. Because you're not questioning their belief system. You're showing them that they're being manipulated, and nobody wants to be manipulated. None of us want to fall for a scam or a hoax. So it's when you talk with people about that, it's much more effective.
So you help news organizations do a better job in the way that they're communicating. How do you think we've done around this variant? You know, it's sort of the first big test since Delta, and it does feel a little bit like this is where we are. Do you think that news organizations in general, what kind of grade would you give them? I'm looking for a little clickbait here. What kind of grade would you give them?
I'd say a B+. I mean, it's very difficult if you're an editor because you know everybody right now is Googling new news about Omicron. Like, we know that everybody's looking for that. So, you know, I just saw a headline about new studies suggest that maybe immunity won't count. And even I was like, don't get caught up, you know, because we want the new thing. So I get it. But I think the biggest lesson that newsrooms are learning is the power of the headline. That even if an article is really responsible, if you have an irresponsible headline, that's the thing that gets shared. That's the thing that goes viral, and the context gets lost. So I think we're all learning, but it's also very compelling right now. If you want eyeballs, like this new variant, like people are coming back to news sites trying to get the latest information. And so it has to be a case of like being responsible, even when it's easy not to be.
Yeah, and it's also hard. I mean, it's hard to keep up with the technology, and I don't mean like the computer kids, but, you know, trying to figure out MySpace and then TikTok, and, you know, they're 100 exponentially ways ahead of us every 5 minutes. So it's hard for news orgs to really stay on that beat.
Yeah, it's really hard. And there's a question of, well, how much should newsrooms be actually actively debunking? Like, journalism is about truth and investigations. It's not about cleaning up the murkier parts of Facebook. But yeah, I mean, TikTok is a space where there's a ton of things on there right now which are pretty problematic too. But you could spend all day going down the TikTok conspiracy theory.
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do, Claire. Claire Wardle, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.